Hi, and welcome to part two, the Ed Puzzle for biomes. There we go. All right, so the first ones we're going to cover are terrestrial or land biomes. Here are your objectives, your EKs, and your skills. And a biome is just an area that shares the same basically combination of temperature and rainfall. Temperature and rainfall over the average of 30 years, that's your climate. And because you have this very specific temperature and precipitation, the community of plants and animals that live in this area are adapted to live in that biome. So camels and cacti have water preserving traits for the deserts. And then you have shrubs and wildflowers in the grasslands recover quickly from fire because they store the majority of their energy in their roots. So these specific plants and animals are adapted to live in these terrestrial biomes. Rainforests, taiga, temperate deciduous forests, tundra, desert, grasslands, a couple different types of grasslands, a couple different types of deserts, a couple different types of rainforests. So for biomes, if you're looking here, your annual precipitation, the highest that you have is tropical rainforest. The lowest precipitation are all of these tundras, temperate grasslands, subtropical deserts, and tundra might have some snow on it, but it doesn't have available moisture. It's also the coldest one, and your subtropical deserts, your tropical rainforest, tropical seasonal forests are your warmest ones. So your biomes, there we go, are defined by that temperature and precipitation. So this biome chart can predict where on Earth biomes are found. You can also take a look at the world map. And I just want to point out for this, the equator is down here. So in the north, we're showing up past 60 degrees north, whereas down in the southern hemisphere, you don't even get to 60 degrees south. And that's because the majority of our landmass is in the northern hemisphere. So a lot of these maps that we see were skewed. The equator isn't bam smack in the middle. Make sure you look to see where the actual equator is. So you see these different colors are different biomes. And here we are in the temperate seasonal forest or the temperate deciduous forest here, and most of Europe is as well. So this, you can predict where different biomes will be found. So if you have 60 degrees north and south of the equator, that's where you're going to have your tundra, your boreal forests, your higher latitudes. Okay, latitude is, remember, that north and south of the equator. And then you have your temperate, which means seasons, it's seasonal. So around your 30 degrees, mostly north of that. And then you have your tropical, which is closer to the equator. And those are your tropical, your temperate, and then you'll get to more Arctic stuff as well. And we'll get into that later. So there's your latitude, the distance from the equator. It's very similar to moving up and down a mountain. As you move north, as you move, increase your altitude, it gets colder. As you increase your latitude, whether it's north or south of the equator, you get colder temperatures. So one of the big things that determines what can live in an area is nutrient availability. So plants need these nutrients to grow, and frozen soils of tundra don't allow the nutrients in the dead organic matter to actually be broken down because it's so cold. So you have very low soil nutrients, low water availability, and not a lot of plants that survive. And it's because of this thing called permafrost. So in the Arctic tundra, permafrost is permanently frozen soil. And this active layer is what plants can grow in every growing season, which is short, a couple of weeks. It thaws out and it freezes up again. Okay? And this is what it looks like. And you don't see big trees and shrubs because they need roots that can go down, and they just don't have that availability when it comes to the tundra. Right? Tropical rainforests have nutrient poor soil. Boreal forests also have nutrient poor soil. Temperate forests, where we are, we have lots of dead organic matter that decomposes every single year in a season we call fall. All of these leaves fall, they go down into the ground, they start to decompose, and we have really nutrient-rich soil here in Jersey and on the East Coast. With climate change can come shifting biomes. So the boreal forests need really cold temperatures. So as the earth warms, what's going to happen is these boreal forests are going to shift north. So here in this picture, they're talking about aspen trees. This is the happy medium for aspen trees in this dark green area, and these are higher elevations. They're saying from 2071 to 2100, this is now going to be the new shift, the new range, and the happy place of aspen trees, which is kind of crazy. You can see a difference in the picture between 1962 and 2004 with the shifting climates. And you can be like, oh, well, there were just less trees in that area, but it wasn't. These trees can now grow in areas that they weren't able to grow in before, and vice versa with warming temperatures. So here's your first FRQ. Identify one characteristic of a biome and explain how that characteristic determines the community of organisms found in that biome. Aquatic biomes. Objectives. So your characteristics of aquatic biomes are different than with terrestrial biomes. With terrestrial biomes, you have temperature and you have your precipitation. Whereas with aquatic biomes, you have salinity, which is the salt, your depth, which is sunlight. If you're on the surface, there's going to be more sunlight. The deeper you go down, less sunlight. Flow, how much water is actually coming into and out of that area, how fast it's moving, and your temperature. Warmer temperature holds less dissolved oxygen. Higher temperatures, colder temperatures hold less dissolved oxygen. So your temperature really takes into play when it comes to these organisms and being able to get enough oxygen. So we have rivers and lakes. Rivers typically have high oxygen levels because of that diffusion and the mixing from the bubbles from the air, and they carry a lot of nutrient-rich sediments and fertile soil. Lakes are standing bodies of fresh water, which are key for our drinking water, and you have a couple different zones. Unfortunately, you do need to know these zones. Your littoral zone is that shallow area around the banks of your lake. Your limnetic is your central area where light can still reach. Your profundal zone is too deep for sunlight, so there's no photosynthesis here. And then your benthic is your bottom layer. This is where your things are burrowing into the ground, where invertebrates and clams and snails and stuff like that live. So now we have freshwater wetlands, and these are areas that are wet lands. The soil is submerged for a specific time of the year, and they're shallow enough for the upper part of their biomass to come up. But these plants that live here are adapted for having basically wet feet. Their roots are wet constantly. Wetlands have an insane amount of benefits, economic, environmental, and cultural for humans, provide a lot of ecosystem services. So they store excess water during storms, lessening floods. They recharge groundwater by absorbing rainfall into their soil. The roots provide filters for pollutants, and you get a lot of plant growth because of the water and nutrient availability in those sediments. So here are some of them. You'll see a swamp, very typical of different types of cypress trees. These are freshwater areas. Then you have marshes with reeds and cattails, and then bogs with different spruce, sphagnum mosses. And these are in some areas, if you've ever seen funny YouTube videos of people walking in the ground being all squishy, those are typically your bogs. Estuaries. These are my personal favorites, and that's where you have the mixing of a river and an ocean. And you have brackish water. So it's slightly salty, depending on whether the tide is coming in. The ocean is coming in to the river and it's making it more salty and usually colder. And then when the river, when the tide recedes, what happens is it's more river water coming out. You get fresh water. Salt marshes is what we have all along the Back Bays in Jersey. If you've ever been to Island Beach State Park, Long Beach Island, you go to the west side of the island, all of those are salt marshes. And they're a breeding ground for fish, shellfish species. And this is what they'll typically look like. Amazing for paddleboarding, kayaking, birding, clamming. I'm really partial to estuaries because that's where I used to work for Fish and Wildlife. And then you have the tropical equivalent of salt marshes. You have mangrove swamps. And swamps get a bad rap, and they're really actually very beautiful places and amazing ecosystem services as well, just like salt marshes. So mangrove trees have these long stilt roots, and what happens is they stabilize the shoreline. They provide habitat for a lot of different species, migratory areas for resting birds, just huge habitats in general. And this is what your typical mangrove swamp looks like. Absolutely beautiful, though. Coral reefs, speaking of beautiful, um, coral reefs exist in warm, shallow waters beyond the shoreline. They are the most diverse marine biome on Earth. And corals, like we had said before, are a mutualistic relationship between corals, which are an animal, and an algae, which is a plant. So it's a mutualistic, symbiotic relationship. And these corals can't survive without these algae inside of them. So the coral take the carbon dioxide out of the ocean to create calcium carbonate, which is their exoskeleton. It provides the carbon dioxide to the algae, and it's a happy relationship. Both these species rely on the other, like I was saying. Intertidal zones is what it sounds like, intertidal, between the tide. So you have the high and low tides. And this is a really tumultuous place to live because you need to be covered part of the time with water, and then you need to be exposed to air part of the time. So they need to survive crashing waves, direct sunlight, heat, and they need to be able to avoid being desiccated, drying out. So you have barnacles, sea stars, crabs. They attach themselves to rock, and they have shells and tough outer skins that prevent them from drying out during these low tides. Okay, so you can see the different zonation. You have a splash zone, a high tide zone, a mid tide zone, and a low tide zone. If you were at the beach at any point in time, you would see during the moon tides, you get higher tides and you get lower tides. So every month, these guys also have to adapt to different conditions as well. So open ocean. Open ocean is vast. The ocean covers 75% of our world, and most of it is open ocean, which is very low productivity. It has algae and phytoplankton. That's kind of the top layer. And then what you have is you have this middle layer, like this twilightish zone, that kind of not a lot happens. And then you have the deep ocean and the ocean floor, which is a bit more productive, but still, there's not a lot there. The algae and the phytoplankton of the ocean produce a lot of the Earth's oxygen, and they absorb the majority of the atmosphere's carbon dioxide, which is a double-edged sword. It's a good thing and a bad thing. We'll get to that. So your photic zone is where sunlight can reach. This is where your photosynthesis happens. Your aphotic zone is this abyssal zone. It's too deep for sunlight, and that's a lot of the ocean. The average depth of the ocean is a bit over a mile. Right? So in your aphotic zone, crazy things happen. One of my favorite episodes of Blue Planet is The Deep, and the footage is old, but it doesn't matter. These things are cool and creepy and amazing. Right? So identify an organism found in an aquatic biome and explain how that organism is uniquely adapted to live in that biome. So do a little bit of research.